let's get started. Let's jump into the WebAssembly filters meeting for June 21st. Monday. Oh, this meeting is perpetually doomed. It's a Monday morning meeting, at least morning here. So happy Monday. Okay, couple of topics that are lined up as a recap of last week, since this is sort of the second, I think, like, formal meeting, official meeting wherein we're dedicating, was it half an hour or an hour or something today to awesome filters. We should review last week's discussion, review part of the purpose of the meeting, and make sure that we've got all of our topics listed. So to do that, let's review part of the purpose of the meeting. So some of you, most of you, are familiar with WebAssembly, which has a number of interesting characteristics about it as a technology. Some things that are reminiscent of reasons why Docker came into popularity, or containers came into popularity. Also has some attributes about it that are somewhat reminiscent of unikernels, for those of you who might have spent some time in that area. The nice thing about WebAssembly is, well, it doesn't have some of the same, it has some of the same security properties, some of the same portability properties, but not some of the same restrictions that unikernel has. Unikernel is missing kind of a lot of tooling, has some of its own thing. But WebAssembly is almost like a modern JVM, if you will. You can write in many different languages and compile to different targets. Those targets run on a small virtual stack. And so one of those virtual stacks is now being supported in Envoy as a data plane proxy that's used by, I don't know, 4 or 5 or more. Depends on how you want to count them, but it's used, Envoy is used as a proxy by a number of service meshes. And so its extensibility model is being augmented to support, or has been augmented to support, insertion and running of small WebAssembly programs. Envoy as a proxy only exposes certain functionalities through its ABI, its application binary interface, and exposes its ABI surface area to WebAssembly programs. And so some of the considerations that we're making in this set of discussions is about about what filters are available, how to write new ones, different use cases for what those might do, how to manage their life cycle, dynamically load them, unload them, configure them, monitor them, espouse kind of a practice of allowing the infrastructure to offboard what might otherwise be some application level logic. And that's part of the promise of WebAssembly and the use of filters in WebAssembly now. So anyway, there's the backdrop. That's kind of why the purpose of the call. We're doing this primarily in context of Meshri as a service mesh manager. And Meshri has some nascent capabilities to manage filters in its current stable release. Those have broadly not been exposed as they are early in nature. But hopefully through these weekly meetings, we'll expose it very soon. Like having the initial set of support for filters in the V060 release, that's the goal. It has been the goal. So, okay. Of last week's topics, quick review. Good. I think we captured. Looks like we've got some carryover into this week from last week, which is good. So with that, Pranav, I think you're first up.
Okay, cool. I'll just begin. I'm looking forward to Navendu's topic, so I'm just going to keep this short and sweet, hopefully. Can I share my screen?
Yep, and don't ask if it's if we can see it. Just assume someone will tell you if they can.
Okay. I was almost going to ask the question. uh, right. So, Samir, this one's for you. Hello, if you're on the call. So, cool. So I just took the liberty to create this. I'll just get into it quickly. Starting a little bit of context. Samir, please do correct me if I'm understanding something differently or whatever. But basically, Samir has a situation where he's getting a JOT from an authentication service. So this JOT is being passed from the front end or whatever source. It goes to an authentication service. The authentication service finishes the authentication well, and it will pass it along to whatever service that requires the JOT itself. So there are a couple of headers within the JOT, and some of it is in the payload and some of it is in the header section. And what Samir wants to do is he wants to be able to remove the ones that he won't be needing, since authentication is already done. So you won't be needing I guess, the authentication, the algorithm or the type. And in the payload section, he has things like email, subject. And normally he would, and his desires to be able to move those email and subject headers from the payload to the header section of the JOT. And to do that, the configuration that you have to pass to the filter currently is going to look something like this. So you'll have an add header, delete header, add payload, delete payload. I haven't added those yet, but and there's going to be what do you say, payload to header and header to payload. So over here you basically name your key value pair, like the header name and the header value. If you want to add something, you have to just mention the header name for delete, payload to header, header to payload. The format is going to look the same. You're going to talk about which header is present, which key is present in the um, in the payload or header of the JOT, and you're going to go on and pass that as a base 64 to your YAML. So you'll take this JSON over here, and you would, oh my god, I'm not prepared. You would essentially, you would have your image hub filter YAML for now. Shortly, you would be able to do this directly through Meshri, but for now, you will be able to just modify this field over here and convert this part to base 64 and just paste it in over here, whatever you want. That will be your configuration. So this you will have to do on a per service basis. And once you do that, you can get into the code. So I have uploaded it on my GitHub page. I'll be sharing you the link to that. Tell me if you want me to shift it elsewhere. But my main goal was it should be as readable as possible. So all the structures, and if it looks like a lot of code, it isn't. It's just a lot of functions, meant to keep things as clear as possible, since Samir is not too good with programming languages and all. So okay, rather than getting into the code, essentially you compile this. I'll be compiling this to Wasm, and I still need to test it out. But I guess I can do that through the Meshri performance patterns performance testing, and I can do that as a I can just give it to Samir and ask if it works out of the box. That will be great. So I think I need to have another discussion just for him to take a look at the code, and I can walk through the code separately with him. There's no need to do that on the call. Basically, this is just to you pass in that JSON and you'll get whatever behavior you want. So
Yeah,
that's the end.
Yeah. So in these, can you go to the particular JSON you were showing?
Okay, crap! I just closed it. Okay. Yeah.
Headed to yeah. So are these field which you are having under the payload to header or header to payload, are those mandatory field? Because sometimes what happens, you people
So
they
what you can do is you can just set it blank.
okay.
You can set it like this, and that will be perfectly fine.
Like empty directory.
Yeah, just empty.
And another thing is, like you have shown the base 64 encoded value. So is that the value corresponding to this particular JSON?
Yeah, pretty much. So I take this, copy, paste it into the base 64 decode, and
Okay.
I have where is the encode part? And then I do this. Take this, and then you just copy it into this that YAML I showed it to you. That's all.
Yeah, great. So like this will be helpful to many more people, because I have seen a lot of open questions on this, on the
I see.
ISPO side and other side. So
Well, glad to be the exclusive place to get this filter hot is Meshri. So glad to be the
yes.
first to get it. Cool. This is free marketing.
Yeah.
Thank you. By the way, thank you. That was really helpful. So
We still have to have our call separately, and I just want to make sure everything is fine.
definitely, yeah, I'm available.
So you can thank me once that is over. Normally, I take payment for this sort of stuff, so I'll be sending you my bank details.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
I have your number, so the Google Pay will.
Yeah. You can Paytm me or Google Pay it. Okay, cool.
In fact, also our company has some open opportunities if you would like to explore.
No, I'm not a full-time guy yet.
Great.
Okay, Lee, I yield my time.
Nice. So in terms of testing, this is ideally something that that we're able to do now, like using Meshri. Were you able to try generating load and test it out?
My only concern was if I do generate the load, how am I going to get the JOT back? The way this works is, okay, it gets it and it pushes it back. So currently I have done some janky stuff where I'm passing it back as a response as well. And also I'm logging it in the Istio proxy stuff. So I've got that part figured out. Now I actually have to test whether through the UI I'm able to generate the load and observe the JOT being constructed properly. So okay. I haven't tested the code out yet, basically.
So, and do we know if Meshri's ability to generate load, even if it's just a handful of requests or one request, does it expose all of the necessary headers that you would need to generate the right load, a load that would match what you're trying to change? So
again, one of the things that I was trying to do is keeping it as generic. So I could take the JOT passed along by Image Hub itself, and use that in order to test it out. So like you have the username and the plan type in Image Hub. So I could just take that, add another header, and the way I've created it is it adds everything first and then allows you to delete. So it's kind of a hacky way, but I can add and then check if I can shift my added header to the payload or the header of the JOT. So again, I can answer your questions a lot better once I actually, compile it and deploy it, if that's fine. So maybe another day or two, I'll be able to tell you and give feedback on the performance stuff.
Yeah, sounds good. So it sounds like of the headers that Meshri is able to pass along as it generates load, like what are those that you need to send along? You need to send a JOT that contains a specific, set of key value pairs.
So the key value pairs, not necessarily. So again, like the filter here, the point is you can configure it, right? So that JSON that I showed you earlier, that I can actually mention. So I could say delete plan. And then ideally from that JOT that I get from the image hub or whatever, I guess the Meshri load generator sends, I could delete it. So again, it totally depends on the, I guess, kind of information being sent and that I can generate. So I can create so since it's a pull request and, since it's a GET request, and along with that GET request, you're attaching that base 64 encoded JOT. I can put in any JOT I want and I can send it as a request. If it will come back successfully, that's a question mark, because then the application, takes a look at that and says, oh, wait, this is not what I expected. But other than that, I can actually craft that from what I can see and I can send it. So again, I think I'll be better equipped to answer that in a day or two.
Okay, good. So thus far, it sounds like Meshri the load generating capabilities has what you need to be able to test it out, save for like verification after the app has processed like what's been modified. So, you'd be sending in packets, the filter would modify it, pass it along to the app. You'd then want to take a look at to verify that that modification was propagated. And so, that's an interesting thing for like an interesting use case for us to be aware of. One of the things that we desire for Meshri to be able to do is to do such testing, is to let people dry run a config change. So an individual like Samir might say, this filter is great. I've been able to use it for this thing. And later on, he might have a slightly different use case and he wants to make a change. As he goes to make that change, facilitating testing of it, like a dry run to verify that his change has the effect, that the desired effect. Mm-hmm. So some amount of thought as you go to test this would be good. Like it might be the case that, so one of the things that Meshri will ultimately be able to do is to, this is to be able to configure this through Mesh Map, one, to Samir's point, but also Meshri would be able to capture traffic and replay traffic as well. And so like in the testing of this particular use case, it might be that one of the things that we might look for Meshri to be able to do is, deploy a dummy service or another upstream service behind the initial one, so that Meshri can capture that traffic like in front and behind the app. So things to kind of think about as we walk through this use case. This is
packet capturing. Okay.
Yeah, one of the things is packet capturing. Yeah. Yep. And then potentially replaying as well. Another thing is might not be packet capturing as much as maybe just sending some telemetry about things that were received, or facilitating, like having a dummy service that's a utility service that's generally instrumented very well and generally helpful for using Meshri to view the output of that transformation. Like if a filter does a transformation like this one, then, you know, like the ability to test the changes, the ability to confirm the changes could come in different ways. Traffic capturing and replaying in general, there's a number of use cases for that functionality as well. So Pranav, thanks for this. This is good. The next steps make sense as well. Right now, do we have an open PR on the JSON Filters repo?
No. I just pushed it again. Once I have got this working and sort of locked down, I will push a PR to the JSON Filters repo. Yeah. Okay. Cool. I guess Navindu can finish his, and then I'll. It's fitting then, I guess, to ask.
Okay. All right. Sounds like we're over to Navindu and the design spec.
Yeah, let me share my screen. Okay. So this isn't really a completed spec, but it really just talks about what the different components are and how it needs to be fit together. So this design specs talks about JSON filters, supporting JSON filters in Meshri. So we recently added the CRUD support, like where users can upload their JSON files, JSON filter files to Meshri and store it. But we don't have, we can't actually deploy this filter onto their service mesh. So this design spec is to support that. And like Meshri patterns, this needs to be this needs to be OEM compatible, or it should follow the OEM specification, which means that like the user can user define their filters in a pattern file and then use that pattern file and apply it to their service mesh using Meshri. So that should work. And so we have some of these features, like the users are able to upload, view, persist, and delete their filter files through the Meshri UI, and they can also do this through Meshri CTL. And the next step for this specification is to actually take this filter file, and this filter file will have an associated configuration file, and pass it on to the service mesh. Let's say it's Istio in this case, and Istio will handle the rest of the stuff. So, and we have some high-level goals. So, as Lee mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, the Istio service mesh has an Envoy custom resource. So that basically handles these filter files and applies it and all those stuff. So once we have a filter file uploaded in the Meshri server or in the Meshri cloud, if that's the case, so if the user has a filter file, then based on our discussion, what we have decided to do is that Meshri will serve these filter files, and these filter files can be accessed by the Onward VM in the Istio mesh, and then it will pull these filter files and apply it. And that's one consideration. Another consideration is how we create the config file. So Gaurav has been recently working on adding a UI, adding this in the UI, like having the allowing the user to specify a configuration for a particular filter file. So it will be basically a form which will have some which will have some values, and the user can pass in these values, and it will be sent to the service mesh along with the filter file. So So the actual, so the form should be dynamically generated, and the actual values that needs to be part of the form can be fetched from the Istio's Onward CRD, and we need to dynamically generate a form based on these data. And the final consideration is that as I mentioned before, like we need so these filters should be should be part of the OM specification. It should follow the OM specification, and a user can basically define these filters in their pattern files and their associated config in their pattern files, and then deploy it as a pattern file with all their other configuration, other service mesh configurations, and all those stuff. And to like these are some high level ideas or plan of actions to how we can move forward to support this. And like we need to figure out how to proceed with this, like what should be a next step. So so for the first thing to do is to serve the pattern file, and it should be like Meshri server should serve these files, and it should be accessible from the from inside the Onward VM. And to generate the custom form, the custom configuration form, we need to fetch the schema from the Onward CRD, and then yeah, and then we need to decide how we will represent this in pattern file. So like Pranav has showed before, like encoding and decoding into base64. So that may be a way to go from here. And yeah, so like what I need is, I need to like see if this is the right way to go forward, and if there are like any other constraints to like go forward from here, then please suggest that. And yeah, that's it.
So I had a question basically. So you mentioned that, okay, so Gaurav has been, like communicating with me and, how to exactly create that dynamic UI form. My only query is so that, what do you say, that form, it's using React JSON Schema, I think, as the package to render that form. That is based off of a fixed schema that I have given. And this is something I have defined, and like, okay, if you see that JSON, it's basically the name of the path and then the rule that the path implements. So if you want to implement, let's say, rate limiter for that path, you would write rule. It'll open up into another segment. It'll say rule type, rate limiter, parameters, blah blah blah, and so on. So that is something I have defined, and that is something I was like, okay, fine. This would definitely be like, sensible as of now. But that form is based off of what I have defined. Now, if let's say someone wants to come and they want to define their own custom JSON, the only option I'm seeing is to allow them to enter the raw JSON manually and then save it. So I just want to know, I just wanted to bring this topic because I just wanted to ask if there was a way to handle all JSON, what do you say, construction without like as a form. Like, does that even make sense? And I just wanted to bring the topic. So like, is what I'm saying, does it make sense?
Like have like forms with where you can pass in key value pairs.
Can I say something? Like when you said that user would enter their own JSON for like schema. I didn't exactly get it. Why would a user need to enter a JSON?
Okay,
for-
okay. So, okay,
So
let me
if
just.
I understand correctly, are you talking about something like inline code?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Something like inline code, how we are passing it with Lua.
No, not inline code. So you have your YAML editor currently that pops out, right? So when I meant entering custom code, I meant something like that. I'm just going to be sending a link on chat. Okay, there's a lot of. Just give me a second. Okay, so I keep bringing up this PR quite a bit, but okay. So in chat, I've put up a pull request. Navendra, could you perhaps open it? Yeah. So in this PR over here, you can see this is the JSON object that I have defined. Now I have said, okay, there's going to be a path name, and this is where it's entered. There's going to be a rule function, a rule parameter, and that's going to have, what do you say, sub parameters within it. And that's where you can define something like rule type rate limiter. Let's say another user comes, they have their own filter, and they're not interested in the path name, and they're not interested in the rule type, and it doesn't suit them. So now why that would matter is because the current form that's being generated is based off of this schema. It's based off of how I've structured this JSON. And to make it dynamic, from whatever I saw in that packet, in the meeting with Gaurav, I do not know if it's very straightforward. So all I'm saying is there needs to be thought put in, because people might not want this format for their thing, and they would want to pass their own JSON, their own custom resource. And in that sense, how are you handling the form is what I'm saying. I know this is a topic for a later day, and it can be covered later, but if the idea is for keeping the UI generic so that the person can just come in and add whatever they want, how does that fit in to the current way that's being implemented? What I'm saying.
I think there are two ways of doing that. One is, it just not have a UI, just allow the person to edit a file and put in the JSON, right?
Yeah,
So
precisely. Yeah.
The other way is, the other way is you can read the JSON file, pick out the key values, and then create the form dynamically.
Read the JSON file, pick out the key values, and create the form dynamically. Okay.
I mean, that implies that there is already a JSON file. Basically, what you're
No, it will not allow you, because anything you want to deploy on AKS or any Kubernetes cluster, it will look for a schema.
So for example, the perfect example would be my, HTTP modifying thing, right? So currently I don't have any path. I don't have any rule type. I just have this add header, remove, delete header, payload to header, header to payload, that sort of structure. So it's completely different from the JSON we just saw now. How would a user, yes, of course, the user entering that as is fine. As a JSON, that would be perfectly, there's no issues whatsoever with that. But I'm saying if the UI is meant to, make it easier for someone to do this, I was just, opening up a discussion as to, is it possible to handle even those cases where, you have some ad hoc schema and you can just generate a, JSON from the form, and the form will dynamically populate, or depending on what sort of element you want, it will generate that dynamic UI. I'm not sure if I'm explaining it clearly enough, but
yes, that is correct. So in that case, what you have to do, you have to defines custom schema wherein user can give their custom values, and depending upon it will do. So one is standard schema, another is custom schema. So standard, like if they want to leverage existing like features what we have already done, they can select the standard schema. Otherwise, they can go with the custom schema, which can be based on
So that standard we need to sort of polish a bit more, I feel, because we would need to incorporate use cases like what I just said. So the current standard, it assumes that there's a path that you want to apply the filter to. Is that assumption going to be applicable for all services? No, that's exactly why I wanted to open up this discussion. So the standard that the UI is currently being implemented for is itself not a standard, if that makes sense.
I think you're talking about something like intelligence or something like that, So you'll have a drop down with possible templates, so you'll be able to define your own format on the go, right? So you'll be able to say choose from or specify your own. Maybe that may be an overkill. I don't.
Hey guys, am I audible right now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I wanted to actually just to put my thoughts on this one, but maybe my mic was not working earlier. So coming back to your point, which you said, Pranav, that if user wants like if a user is using some different filter than image hub, and if it has a different JSON schema than what you have defined in that PR, there can be two things that we can do. The first thing is that when we fetch that filter from the CRD, or I guess wherever we are fetching that filter from, we can have a schema already attached to that filter somehow, so that we can just pass it to the user interface. That is one thing I guess that we can do. The other thing that we can do is that if you are just giving me the JSON that is in the PR itself, like the one with the pull rules, rate limiter, etc., we can try to convert this into the schema that the library that we are using accepts in a manner. Those are the two things that we can do, I guess. And
so you're saying that there should be another drop down sort that will let you select the schema you want to generate the JSON for.
Wait,
Because
drop-down
currently like doesn't matter, like just there'll be a particular drop down when you want to define a configuration. It'll say schema, there'll be default, or you can upload your own what do you say, JSON schema, and based on that schema it will generate the UI. So
yeah, potentially. Let's actually make it easier on ourselves and agree to a couple of things initially, and maybe we'll achieve the goal of a purely dynamic configuration. I think there's an assumption that the configuration that would be given, the custom configuration for a filter, that it would be in JSON is an assumption, as it may not be. And so to start, one, we should clarify on a couple of terms, and then two, I think we should make this in a couple of phases, probably. So correct me if I'm wrong, but actually this FAQ here may help in our the language that we use or the discussions that we have. And so I think there's two configurations that we're concerned with. One of those is a configuration that's service mesh specific. The service mesh that you're using is aware, well, may or may not be aware of filters. The console service mesh that we've used to deploy filters in the past, its control plane is unaware of the fact that there is or is not such filters deployed. But to the extent that they are, so in this case, Istio to start with, that service mesh, that control plane it'll be cognizant of the fact that a filter is present or isn't, and it will require configuration to identify which proxies in the data plane have which filters. And so for that service mesh, there is just sort of a generic configuration. It's like it's filter agnostic. So to the service mesh itself, it may say, well, I don't really know what this filter is, and I'm certainly not going to be. It's certainly not going to be aware of the specific type of configuration that specific filter needs. It is going to be aware of, and it is going to need configuration of itself, of the data plane, to identify what filters associated with what proxies and what string, what filter specific configuration, the second type, needs to be provided to which filter. And so the second type of configuration is, well, one of the examples that Pranav was showing with, that's specific to the custom filter that he's writing right now to transform JOTs. And so it just so happens that in that specific filter, it expects JSON, and it expects it using key value pairs to identify certain and do whatever it's going to do. That is something that I would suggest that we like critically need to facilitate to capture that config and pass it along. But at the moment, I think would be remiss to jump to something so difficult as trying to A, enforce that config is always in JSON, B, that we can dynamically discern what input types are most appropriate to show to an end user. It's like, hey, maybe we can do that, but maybe not. But to start with, let's be successful or set ourselves up for success by not attempting to do that. We do need to capture for both. If Meshri remains ignorant of the specifics of a given filter's configs, I think that's okay to start with. There might be certain filters that we find are commonly used and we're heavily invested in. And so maybe we provide either a hard-coded, improved experience that's visual in nature, or whatever that is. Let's discuss that after we're successfully deploying filters specific to a mesh, capturing what filters should go on what, against what service or against what proxies, passing along the custom config. One of the first steps that we can take is in the Meshri UI is to be able to open up and allow users to edit that string in whatever format that is, YAML or JSON or just text. And then in Istio's case, it expects that string, I think, is base 64 encoded. So that might be a use case for Meshri to help facilitate on the user's behalf, is like make that convenient so you don't have to bring in other tools. Does that help clarify and set?
Yeah, pretty much. No, I thought this was just the design spec, so just putting that down so it doesn't slip everyone's minds. So that's why I wanted to strike up the conversation.
Okay. For Utkarsh, for Navendu, for Soham. So okay, Soham's got a thumbs up.
Yeah, sounds good. What about the other questions I had, like?
And Navendu, you talked about the custom CRD for Envoy. So do we need to, does it comes under the ISTO CRD, or it's or we have to install the Envoy also?
No, I think it's specific, like it's with Istio. Istio deploys it at the Envoy thing as the CRD.
Okay.
Lee, like how will a user define it in pattern files, like?
Yeah, so users should be able to define their patterns in the pattern files. Okay, good. So Utkarsh, can you enlighten us on this, number 3?
Yeah, so right now, if we talk about only this generic generic onward filter, so in that case, actually, it's like it's a normal parent file. Just in the settings, you will be able to access every field that you have access to in this basically in the onward filter spec field, in Istio's onward filter spec field. Yeah, let me share the PR. Actually, the PR that I created, it had a snapshot. Let me share this link to that. So I think for the generic one, that is that is when we are not concerned with what the configuration should look like. I think that would just work fine. But for the one that is that gets specific to the filter, I'm not quite sure that how we be. I'm not even sure if we should be discussing it right now. But the idea was that we can probably create multiple resources, that is like rate limit filter and JOT modifying filter, something like that. And if we have that, then I think that should be enough to get a dynamic UI for that, because I mean, it's not schemaless, right? Pranav expects some schema it to have, and that schema just has to go into a JSON schema. That should be it.
On that concept, by the way, it might be that, so Pranav has written this beautiful JOT transformation filter that everyone and their grandma uses. And so, well, maybe that's a quote unquote official filter, or what I mean to say is, to Utkarsh's point, well, that one's been around long enough. Maybe that's one where we've come to understand that it uses JSON in its custom configuration. If the filter is written and it adheres to this spec, or it uses JSON in this way, then you would expect that Meshri's UI gives you an enhanced experience. Like, that seems like a logical set of steps to follow. And then Utkarsh, I think, are you hunting down the PR that?
Yeah, I found the PR, but I didn't actually add the config there. I'll probably actually write one and share it in the channel, wasn't channel.
Okay. So in some respects, in the Vendu, in answer to your question, the way in which users will describe a filter and capture it in their pattern file should be relatively straightforward. I would imagine that there needs to be a URI, like an HTTP endpoint that identifies the location of the filter. The encoded or not, just like the string for any custom configuration that might be applied to the filter, which I expect could be empty in some cases. Part of it will be like, to Nivendu's question is like, well, it might be that you're describing an application in your pattern file, and maybe the application is comprised of 6 services. Well, but it turns out like only the first service needs to have this JOT transformation filter, and the other 4 or 5 should have some other telemetry filter, something like that. That inside the pattern file, if you use your imagination to think about a Kubernetes manifest or a Docker Compose file, probably more like a Docker Compose file, that's kind of the same experience that someone would have in designing their pattern file, that they would have under each service, under each section that describes the 6 services, that section, if it was applicable, that section would call out that the identifier for that filter, and that filter would be described elsewhere in the same YAML file or a separate YAML file, separate pattern file. So long as Pranav's grandma can read YAML, I think we're
Yeah, my grandmom can only use a keypad phone, so I don't think this so long
Oh,
is
no.
going to.
And so Utkarsh, as you potentially find an example, I mean, Utkarsh, maybe you can send it out after the call. I know, you know, but back to Navendu's kind of the rest of Navendu's question. I think the couple of questions that you'd had were sort of surrounding that same.
Yeah, and another thing is like the the first point, like we can like we will serve the filter file in Meshri, right? Like will it be stored in Meshri or in Meshri cloud? And
Yeah, that's a great question. So so what line item are we on? Actually, we'll just take a quick note here. I lost. Wait, okay. So, okay. So here, so on number one, all right. So if users are describing in pattern files, and part of that is that they would also be either potentially separately capturing the config, or maybe in the same pattern file capturing the config. Part of this will be illuminated, I think, as Utkarsh shares kind of the current definition of how to describe a filter in a pattern file, that irrespective that that pattern file and that custom configuration and the filter itself, the binary itself, like they need to be persisted somewhere, and they need to be made available as well. Like by made available, like when the proxy spins up and it is to be, or it's sitting there spinning and it's actively serving traffic to its sidecar application. And the control plane for that proxy says, well, it's time for you to receive a filter. Well, and so here's the location of that filter. It's like, well, okay, that that filter needs to be, you know, the network connectivity needs to be guaranteed that it can, you know, that filter can be accessed. And that's usually like probably the control plane itself is the one that needs to be able to access where the filters are so it can pull it and then pass it along to the data plane proxy. Generally, that would be what I would expect that most of the service meshes would do. And so it's like, okay, well, where are the filters? Where are they being loaded and where's the configuration available? It's like, well, in Meshri. So Meshri, you load up your performance profiles, your test results, your pattern files, your filter binaries, your filter config. Good. Meshri becomes like the title of this doc. Well, I don't know if it's this doc, but the title of the other doc is called Filter Hub. It's like, well, is Meshri server, is Meshri that filter hub? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, I think we sort of I jumped the gun on sort of using the term filter hub, mostly because I was trying to genericize image hub and other things. But yeah, so the answer here is a Meshri server, and whether someone is using a local provider or a remote provider, persistence and how persistence is done would be handled the same. Like, so, yep. So, you know, with some of the assumptions that I've just stated in hand, it's, well, the control plane needs to be able to talk to the management plane, to Meshri server. The individuals that are using that Meshri server may be using a local provider or a remote provider. Either way, Meshri server needs to make its artifacts, the filter binary, available. And so the way that a lot of this operates today, so Navendu is doing a good job of calling out that this flow in number one is slightly divergent from the general flow by the way in which Meshri generally propagates instructions and invokes operations, like invokes configuration on the service mesh control plane. Part of that in this case will be handing over an artifact. And depending upon how that control plane likes to receive the artifact or come get the artifact, in this case, it probably likes to come get the artifact. Meshri needs to make sure that the artifact is available over HTTP. And so Meshri is sitting there as a server. It's ready to serve those artifacts. Meshri becomes an artifact repository in this particular case. And there are other use cases for Meshri or Meshri Cloud, the local provider or the remote provider to be that artifact repository. Does that help? So if the user is using a remote provider, Meshri Cloud, if they've signed into Meshri, Meshri Cloud becomes probably that artifact repository. We need to expand on this and have a couple of sequence diagrams, a couple of flows, so that we understand whether or not network connectivity would always be facilitated, and we need to, guarantee that it is. We need to sort of examine the sequence, the flows by which Istio specifically wants to retrieve the filter, the binary, and from where it's doing that. So that might be the starting position for like what to do next in terms of answering this, is documenting how Istio grabs it. Nivendu, next question, or?
Yeah, that's it. Like that was the questions. Like I have something to go look into and iterate upon. So I guess we in the next meeting. By the next meeting, we will have something more concrete in this, and maybe we can even start working on it.
Cool. All right. Anything else that we have today? So we covered, I think we covered both of our topics. We should talk very briefly, since we're at the top of the hour, as to what we would anticipate for next week's topics. So Pranav, that's kind of a tested, vetted, PR'd JOT transformer.
Can I keep the name JOT Transformer 9000 though?
I think so. I think so. Which I got a chuckle out of. Tested. Transformer. So Soham Gaurav. So potentially for next week, getting a look at how people might edit the custom config in Meshri UI, in the form-based UI, or in MeshMap. Nivendu sounds like an iteration on the spec in terms of like artifact serving. It's probably one part of that. The other part is like we should be taking this initial JOT, the JOT Transformer 9000, and using it as probably an example within the pattern file for. So anyway, help me. So I'm here. I can just dish out the action items all day long. So anyway, if you guys want to write down some of the things that, and so for Samir, it might be that, assuming that he might be able to test out the filter in one of his environments potentially, and so. On Meshri CTL, so there in concept, there may not be any changes necessary. so long as the custom configuration is captured inside the pattern file. So it might just be more about testing. Okay, what did we miss? Did we miss anything? So to those that were, so Gaurav, can you write down what to anticipate next time? Soham?
Wait, pardon, what did you just say?
Can you write down kind of what to anticipate for next week? So what should we be expecting?
Okay.
Cool. Does it, and then since I just verbalized those, I won't make everybody hang out to watch me write them down. But anyone have anything else before we wrap up? Does anyone think, so please do give, for all of you that are here, like give this some consideration. Are there, we've been loose on painting a high level vision for like the thing that Navendu is asking is like part of that high level vision, like so it sounds like Meshri server might become something of a filter hub. It seems like that kind of seems like that's on the path. That's the path that we're on. So seeing that visually might be helpful to a lot of people, especially some of those that have been silent on the call. So
No,
so
I'm
maybe
not
Lee,
silent.
yep, say it again, Samir.
Yes.
Okay, nice. Yeah, maybe there's an action item in there for Lee or for someone who wants to do an architectural diagram. Good. I'll go highlight an area in Meshri's architecture slides and maybe tag a couple of folks that would be interested in seeing that or trying to take it on. And so if nobody does, I'll take a crack at it and ask for feedback. Cool. Okay, we're 5 after, so it's time. Navendu and Pranav, Samir, thanks guys. We'll hear more from Gaurav and Soham next week, I think.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
See you guys.
We are actually 20 after.
What?
Oh, all right, fine. I'm changing it to an hour then. That's it. That tears it. Okay. Bye all. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.